As her cafe burned, Madison Carter stood frozen, watching her life turn to ash. Then, from the mist, came the roar of hundreds of motorcyclists racing toward her. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming against the tin roof of Maddie's place, like a cruel reminder of the storm gathering not just outside, but inside Madison Carter's heart. The cafe, once alive with laughter and the clinking of coffee cups, now stood hollow, save for the weary woman wiping down counters that hadn't seen enough customers to justify the effort. Madison's hands moved mechanically, her mind lost in the familiar swirl of overdue invoices, dwindling supplies, and the mortgage notice pinned mockingly above the cash register. Willow Creek had once been a town where everyone knew everyone, but as industries dried up and families moved away, it had shriveled into a ghost of itself. Madison stayed, tethered by the memory of better days and the quiet hope that somehow her cafe could still be a refuge. Not just for her, but for anyone needing a place where the world's hardness softened, even if just for a while. Locking the front door that night felt heavier than usual, as if sealing herself inside a sinking ship. She tugged her coat tighter, the sharp cold seeping through fabric and bone. That's when she saw him, a figure hunched near the edge of the cracked sidewalk, illuminated only by the flickering neon sign that buzzed weakly against the storm. The man looked more wreckage than human, drenched to the bone, his torn leather jacket clinging to a gaunt frame, muddy boots sinking into puddles. His motorcycle lay beside him, a rusted heap of metal that seemed to have given up along with its rider. Madison's first instinct was caution, her second, compassion. She approached slowly, her voice gentle but firm, slicing through the hiss of rain. "Need a place to stay tonight?" He lifted his head with effort. Under the tangled hair and weeks' worth of grime, his eyes burned, a wounded kind of pride battling against sheer survival. His name, he said, was Jake Dawson. A name that carried the faint weight of a life that had once meant something, maybe even something good. For a long heartbeat, he said nothing. Madison waited, patient, unflinching, offering something rare and terrifying: trust. Finally, Jake gave a stiff nod, as if swallowing shards of his own pride. Inside the cafe's upstairs room, the heat worked its slow magic. Madison handed him a steaming bowl of stew, simple, hearty, salvaged from leftovers she couldn't afford to waste. Jake's hands trembled slightly as he accepted it, not from cold, but from a deep, gnawing hunger that seemed to shame him more than any hardship. She didn't ask questions. He didn't volunteer answers. In the unspoken exchange between two battered souls, something far stronger than words passed between them. That night, as Jake collapsed onto the worn-out bed and stared up at the stained ceiling, he realized that for the first time in what felt like years, someone had seen him as more than just a burden. And for Madison, as she sat alone by the window and watched the rain blur the empty streets, a small, fragile flame flickered inside her chest, the kind of hope born not from promises or miracles, but from the stubborn insistence that kindness, even in the smallest of acts, still mattered. By the time sunlight clawed its way over the mountains, Jake Dawson was nothing more than a memory. No note, no farewell, only the faint smell of rain still lingering in the air and the crumpled bed upstairs where he had briefly existed. Madison Carter stood in the quiet, hollow space of Maddie's place, her heart a storm of disappointment and confusion. Maybe she had been foolish. Maybe in trying to believe in goodness, she had only invited more heartbreak. She locked the door with a bitter twist of the key and buried the ache deep, telling herself it didn't matter. People left. Dreams crumbled. She had learned that much already. 3 days slid by like ghosts. The town's gray winter days stretched endlessly, and Madison tried to focus on the small comforts she still had, grinding coffee beans in the morning, baking biscuits for the few faithful customers who trickled through her door. Hope was a fragile thing, but she clung to it with bleeding hands, until the call came. The shrill ring shattered the early morning silence, jerking Madison awake in the half-light before dawn. The voice on the other end was panicked, urgent. "Maddie's place. It's burning." She raced through the empty streets, heart slamming against her ribs, her breath fogging the cold air. When she rounded the corner onto Main Street, the sight drove a scream into her throat. Her cafe, the small, stubborn dream she had fought for, bled for, was engulfed in flames. Hungry, violent tongues of fire devoured the wooden walls, the handmade sign, the life she had built board by board. The firemen worked furiously, but against the roaring inferno, they were little more than shadows in a losing battle. Neighbors watched from their windows, faces pale and wordless. No one stepped forward. No one tried to help. Madison could only stand there, fists clenched, nails biting into her palms, powerless. When the smoke finally cleared, Maddie's place was a skeleton of itself, charred beams clawing at the sky, ashes choking the earth where laughter and coffee once lived. The investigation was quick and quiet. Arson, they said. A professional job, precise and deliberate. The whispers around town carried another name. Trent Wheeler. Trent, the man with sharp suits and sharper smiles, who had spent months circling Madison like a vulture, offering to buy her out for a fraction of what her place was worth. When she refused, when she held the line against his ambition, he found another way to claim what he wanted. No one dared speak up against him. His money stitched too many pockets shut, and his influence loomed like a noose over the dying town. Madison stood in the ruins of her dream, ash clinging to her boots, tears carving cold tracks down her cheeks, and understood the brutal truth. In Willow Creek, justice was just another thing the rich could burn. The days following the fire bled together in a gray, numbing fog. Madison Carter moved like a shadow among the ruins, salvaging what little she could. Burnt silverware twisted into grotesque shapes, a single half-charred photograph of her and her son tucked into a cracked frame. Her hands were blistered from sifting through ash, her spirit hollowed by grief. Hope, she realized, was the cruelest lie of all. In Willow Creek, dreams didn't just die. They were buried without ceremony, and no one came to mourn. That morning, she was kneeling in the rubble, soot staining her jeans, and the cold biting through the worn fabric of her jacket, when she felt it, first as a vibration under her palms, then as a low, guttural rumble rolling through the earth. She frowned, lifting her head. Across the far edge of Main Street, where the mist clung to the pavement like spilled milk, the horizon shivered. Madison rubbed the back of her hand across her eyes, certain she was hallucinating. But no, something was coming. The rumble grew into a roar, deep and primal, like the heartbeat of some ancient creature roused from its slumber. Out of the mist they came, engines snarling, headlights cutting through the gloom, a formation of motorcycles stretching as far as she could see. They weren't polished showroom bikes. These machines bore the scars of 1,000 roads. Dented fenders, patched leather saddlebags, engines rebuilt more times than anyone could count. The riders were just as battered. Weathered faces, tattoos peeking from torn sleeves, eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty and survived it. And at the head of the pack, astride a black, battered Harley, rode Jake Dawson. Madison staggered to her feet, disbelieving. For a breathless moment, time fractured. The devastation behind her, the storm of roaring engines before her, and in between, the fragile thread of one act of kindness that refused to break. Jake swung off his bike, boots crunching against the gravel, and tipped his head toward her, the barest flicker of a smile ghosting across his lips. No grand speeches, no dramatic promises, only action. Without hesitation, the riders dismounted. Some formed rough lines, clearing debris piece by piece. Others pulled tarps, timber, and crates of supplies from their bikes, moving with the precision of men and women who had fought battles far more vicious than fire and greed. A surge of heat rose in Madison's chest, different from the rage and sorrow that had consumed her. This was something older, something indestructible. Faith, battered but unyielding, rising from the ashes. As the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over Willow Creek, the first beams of the new Maddie's Place were already taking shape, skeletons of hope against the darkening sky. Jake stood beside her, arms crossed, surveying the work with a quiet pride. His voice, when it came, was low but unbreakable. "We're not just rebuilding your cafe, Maddie. We're rebuilding your dream." And for the first time in days, Madison dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, dreams in Willow Creek could still be made of something stronger than ash. The first morning of rebuilding had felt like an act of defiance. By the second week, it had transformed into something bigger, a rebellion of hope. Madison Carter stood by the cracked window frame, coffee cup cradled in her hands, watching as men and women who bore the weight of their own battered histories swung hammers, lifted beams, and mixed concrete with a relentless, almost sacred determination. The roar of engines that had once shaken the sleepy streets of Willow Creek had faded, replaced now by the steady rhythmic sounds of reconstruction, wood meeting nails, voices shouting measurements, laughter rising over the clatter of tools. It was not chaos. It was a symphony. The townspeople, at first hesitant, began to creep closer day by day. It started with a loaf of fresh bread left anonymously on the doorsteps. Then an old carpenter showed up with a tool belt slung over his shoulder. Mothers brought casseroles. Teenagers offered their muscles. People Madison had thought lost to apathy or fear rediscovered something inside themselves as they watched these strangers, men and women with battle scars and oil-streaked jackets, build not just a structure, but a statement. When Trent Wheeler stormed into the construction site, red-faced and barking threats about illegal operations, he expected fear. He expected groveling. Instead, he found himself facing a solid wall of leather and steel-eyed resolve. Dozens of bikers froze mid-swing, mid-hammer, and simply stared him down in silence, a silence heavier and more lethal than any shout. Trent's voice cracked. His threats stuttered into nothingness. And in the face of a unity he could never buy or bully, he did the only thing cowards do when confronted by real power. He fled, his reputation bleeding out behind him like a wounded animal. The rebuilding continued, faster and stronger, as if the very soul of Willow Creek had been stitched back together beam by beam. When the grand reopening day arrived, the new Maddie's Place stood taller, broader, and more alive than Madison had ever dared to dream. The scent of fresh wood mingled with roasted coffee, laughter flooded the air, and the walls gleamed with new life. Along the far wall, a gallery of framed photographs immortalized the miracle. Jake Dawson, standing proud at the helm of his brotherhood, the army of bikers hammering, lifting, smiling. Every picture a testament to loyalty, defiance, and love born from the simplest act of kindness. Behind the counter, Madison wiped at the tears that kept slipping down her cheeks, not from sorrow, but from a gratitude so immense it felt like her chest could barely contain it. She had opened her door once, to a man the world had forgotten. And in return, the world had come roaring back to remind her that kindness, raw, stubborn, unconditional kindness, was stronger than fire, stronger than fear, stronger even than the greed that once threatened to swallow her whole. Maddie's place wasn't just a cafe anymore. It was a fortress built from second chances, stitched together by a family she had never known she was worthy of. And in the quiet between the laughter and the clink of coffee cups, Madison understood the simple, breathtaking truth. Kindness didn't just save her dream. It had rebuilt an entire community, one heart, one hand, one act of courage at a time.